Have you seen the horribly fantastic box office bomb Solarbabies?
They drained the ponds and the streams, covered the lakes, and even the ocean, so no water could evaporate into the air. They caused the drought, so they can control our lives. You can't beat them.
What happens when you take every single big Hollywood idea that's come through the doors in the last 10 years and place them in a blender? Well, you get Solarbabies, a movie with so many ideas and stories to tell that it abandons most of them as soon as it introduces them. To understand where this movie came from, you have to start with a man who actually created it, a fine arts painter from Los Angeles named Douglas Anthony Metrove, who had studied at UCLA Film School and decided he had no idea how to raise millions of dollars to make a movie, and went off to New York to become a painter instead. But in 1979, Metrove became friends with Abel Ferrara, the underground director behind movies like Driller Killer, and learned that you didn't need millions of dollars to make a feature film. So he came up with an idea. His original vision for Solarbabies was heavily influenced by George Lucas's first film, THX 1138. The kids wore all white, set against the desert, clean, stark, and original. Tire Town was still in it, but in Metrove's version, everything was literally made out of tires. The clothes, the homes, everything. They all wore headphones, which makes me wonder if any of them were actually deaf, like this one character in the movie. There was a neat gas mask. The kids were inventive. They built a giant kite to fly themselves across the ravine instead of just simply skating over it. Or they send a little mouse up a balloon to scout ahead, which I don't know how that works. It was, as Metrove described it, the little rascals of the future, quaint, charming, and entirely his own. To pitch this idea, Metrove did something nobody in Hollywood had ever seen before. He hired some real kids, gave them costumes, put them on roller skates, and photographed them at 35mm still film out in the countryside. Oh, you know what? Some people might have done that. And built a 12-minute computerized slideshow synced to music he wrote himself that he could project onto a full theater screen. And in 1980, it was quite the powerful presentation. One of the people who saw it was the young producer's assistant named Mark Johnson, who would later win the Academy Award for producing Rain Man, but at the time was just a kid starting out, recently working as an assistant to Mel Brooks. Johnson brought Metrove to Brooks, and Brooks saw the presentation, and Brooks loved it, agreed to let him direct, and gave him $2 million to make the movie. Now, Metrove wasn't a writer, so Brooks hired a young up-and-coming writer, a man named Roger Taylor, who received $100,000 to turn Metrove's treatment into a screenplay, while Metrove focused on developing the rest of the film. A year later, Brooks called Metrove into his office and explained that the script was...
That is one big pile of shit.
And he was ready to drop the project entirely until Metrove, determined to keep his movie alive, offered to write the next draft himself. Brooks agreed, laughing at the idea, and Metrove wrote the script on spec, meaning Brooks wasn't paying him. He was guided through the process page by page by Waylon Green, the same man who wrote movies like The Wild Bunch for Sam Peckinpah, a film registered in the Library of Congress and considered one of the greatest westerns ever made, who would later go on to also butcher Frank Miller's RoboCop, before ending his theatrical career co-writing a treatment for Disney's Dinosaur, and quietly retreated to television forever. Metrove and Green wrote it together. Metrove drafting 20 pages at a time, Green sending back notes, until they had a finished script. Brooks was excited by the screenplay, paid for Metrove's Writers Guild fees, and gave Metrove Writers Guild flat pay. But then he had to pay Waylon Green, and Green was one of the highest paid writers in Hollywood at the time. So, now having to spend a significant amount of money on Green's services, Brooks decided to get his money's worth and began rewriting the script with Green himself. In the process, Metrove's original vision got progressively dismantled. The all-white aesthetics, inventive contraptions, the quaint charm, just gone, replaced by something bigger and considerably more confusing. The budget went from $2 to $5 million, and Metrove, the man who had created the entire idea, pitched it, written it on spec, and shepherded it this far, was quietly replaced as director because the movie was now too expensive for a first-time director. But just think about that. It's the mid-1980s. Mad Max is a global franchise. E.T. has made a fortune on the back of an alien friendship. The Breakfast Club just proved that team ensemble movies print money, and Blade Runner was convinced every studio executive in Hollywood that dystopian futures looked very cool, even though it failed at the box office. So what if you put all of those things together into one movie? For kids, Brooks thought it sounded great. He budgeted at $5 million, originally under Metro's direction it was $2 million, and personally invested $1.5 million of his own money. The plan was to shoot on location in Spain, chosen for the desert landscapes, and importantly, its lower production costs, non-union crews, and tax breaks. Cheap and cheerful. What could go wrong? Everything, as it turned out. Before a single frame was shot, there was already trouble at the director's chair. The film's second choice post-Metrov was John Boorman, the writer-director behind Deliverance, Zardoz, and Excalibur. John Boorman, the man that took Otis behind the tree, gave us Sean Connery in a red diaper, and at this time was finishing up a movie about a boy who was kidnapped by a group of Amazonian natives, the Emerald Forest. I don't think cheerful skating teenagers would be his bag, and I'm right. Boorman read the script and by his own account, winced repeatedly. He came back to Brooks' film with a proposal. Let him overhaul the screenplay entirely, leaning into the mythological and religious undertones of the story. And Mel Brooks, unwilling to delay the start of production, said no. He was replaced with Alan Johnson, his trusted choreographer and collaborator. The man who had staged Springtime for Hitler and producers, who had successfully directed the 1983 Brooks film comedy To Be or Not to Be, a successfully directed film that made a small profit and gave Brooks a little too much confidence in Johnson's range. So Brooks had his choreographer to direct a sci-fi action film in the desert with teenagers on roller skates. To Brooks's credit, Johnson had proven himself once. But a wartime comedy set mostly on stage is a very different undertaking from a sprawling post-apocalyptic adventure across the Spanish countryside, which should also be mentioned doesn't contain a single song or dance. Principal's photography began on September 16th, 1985, and then it rained for weeks. Spain had been chosen because it was a desert, probably more for the tax breaks. And yet the production was held up repeatedly by rain. The one thing a movie about a dried-up, waterless dystopia could not use. Weather delays began eating into the schedule. Then the real problems started. On-set arguments broke out between young cast and director Johnson. Footage that Johnson had already shot was reviewed by the studio and found to either not make narrative sense or too simply technically unusable. Reshoots were ordered, and shockingly, a lot of those reshoots didn't help the narrative by the end. The budget, which had started at $5 million, was burned through in what some accounts suggest was less than 2 weeks. Brooks flew to Spain. He threatened to fire everybody, but after some grumbling, he flew back home and enlarged the movie's production budget. By the time the cameras finally stopped rolling and the editors, visual effects teams, and composer Maurice Jarre, which I don't think I said that correctly, the Oscar-winning composer of Lawrence of Arabia, who had just the year before scored Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, which is almost certainly why someone thought he would be perfect for this, but they had all finished their work. The budget had ballooned to $23 million. Brooks had taken out a second mortgage on his own home to fund the completion. MGM and their distribution partner paid $14 million for the picture, meaning Brooks had personally absorbed somewhere in the neighborhood of $9 million in losses. It opened on November 26, 1986, Thanksgiving weekend. It was competing with 6 other movies that were releasing on the same weekend: Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, Don Bluth's An American Tale, and the movie that has been called pretty racist, re-released Song of the South. But they were all also competing with the 9th week #1 spot in a row, Crocodile Dundee. And the movie bombed spectacularly. Oof. It also lost to Chuck Norris's movie that no one remembers, Firewalker, and Charlie Sheen's The Wraith. It finished in 18th on its grand release, which is a death knell. It finished behind 28th week Top Gun, 16th week Stand By Me, and 9th week The Name of the Rose. In fact, it wouldn't even make the same amount of money in its short-lived box office run to match what Top Gun brought in on its 28th week. Brooks would later admit in a rare interview on How Did This Get Made podcast, the only time he ever publicly discussed the film in depth, that when John Borman winced at the script, it probably should have been an indication of something. So, what exactly does $23 million buy? In the distant future, specifically, it is post-nuke year 41, a designation the film gives exactly once and then abandons completely. Always remember to come back to years later in your movies, or just pull a Star Wars and be ambiguous. Earth had run out of water. Most of it had been captured and is now controlled by the paramilitary organization called Eco Protectorate, who took over the world after defeating the Eco Warriors. Two sides both using Eco. That wouldn't be confusing. But they are led by a villain named Grok, played by Richard Jordan, with the energy of a man who made peace with his career choices. Also, it should be mentioned that Grok starts out as a local police chief before the movie just quietly decides he's actually the supreme commander of everything, with no real explanation of when that happened or why. The children are raised in state-run orphanages where they are indoctrinated into the Protectorate service, and some of this indoctrination is just full-on police brutality. Yeah, that's just, you get kids to side with authority. That right there. But in between their military conditioning, they are encouraged to play a legal and illegal, depending on where you're playing. But it's a sport called skateball, which is roller derby in a big pit with lacrosse sticks in the middle of post-apocalyptic wasteland. Here I was thinking that roller skates would seem to be a really bad idea to have in a destroyed future, since they need flat surfaces. Also, this is another example of something that's introduced and has no other purpose. Most movies would have our characters use their skill in skateball, beat the Protectorate goons in a match for the big finale at the end of the movie. But here, nope, nada. It's like, here's a pointless sport. Anyways, our heroes are the Solarbabies, a gang of teen orphans who are good at skateball and even better at generating a found family montage. There's Jason, the de facto leader, played by the very young Jason Patric. There's Tara, the girl of the group, played by Jamie Gertz. There's Matrone, who makes rude comments that spoils everyone's mood. There's Tug, played by Peter DeLuise. Rabbit, the, I don't want to say black friend, but yeah. And there's Daniel, the young death boy, for about 5 minutes. And 30 seconds of those, you actually realize he's deaf. And he's played by Lucas Haas, who is mostly there so the plot has somewhere to go. One night, Daniel wanders from the group during an illegal skateball game and discovers a glowing orb at the bottom of an abandoned mine. The orb, which the film will eventually tell us is called Bodhi, named after a Buddhist concept, apparently, of enlightenment, which something the film doesn't tell us. But the orb immediately restores Daniel's hearing. The same hearing that you just found out that didn't exist, and magically he has it. Also, it glows, bounces, and communicates telepathically, occasionally levitates, and seems to have a profound spiritual significance that the movie gestures at repeatedly without ever quite committing to or exploring. Bodhi is essentially E.T. if E.T. were a ball. The Protectorate finds out about the orb and wants to confiscate it. Wait, when did they find out about the orb? Let's see. Darstar, played by Adrian Pastar, steals it in order to take it to his people for some reason. Daniel goes into pursuit. The children, Solar Babies, go in pursuit of Daniel. Oh, now I remember. Darstar tells his people about this sacred holy object, and they immediately want to sell it to the Protectorate. Well, the E Protectorate. Gotta remember the E. Grok, the local chief of police and head honcho of the Galactic Empire, dispatches his soldiers after the Solar Babies because escaping orphans is a big no-no. They skate off across the wasteland to protect Bohai from falling into the wrong hands. Darstar's hands, that is. Before they finally get Bohai from Darstar, lose Bohai within 5 minutes after reclaiming him, and actually put Bohai in even greater danger than he was in Darstar's hands. Along the way, they encounter 2 bounty hunters. That's it. Encounter for 5 minutes and are quickly freed soon after. Never mentioned again. They also go to a town called Tire Town, which is basically Barter Town for Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. But, with a smaller budget, a higher chance of lung cancer. They also meet a group called the Eco Warriors, which I mentioned earlier, who are the resistance against the Protectorate. I think. The intro tells us they are, but nothing in the movie tells us, me, whatever, that they are. Also, we're introduced to Tara's tattoo 10 minutes before we find out about her father, and this tattoo is apparently how they're able to identify that this is his kid because he tattooed his baby. But with Bohai's capture by the Protectorate, the Solar Babies mount a rescue. While being held against its will, Bohai is screwed. I mean, literally. But then Bohai is freed by the children riding in on their skates and beating the bad guys with lacrosse sticks. I'm serious. Bet they wish they didn't use smooth concrete flooring now. In the film's climax, the orb rises into the sky, shatters a massive dam, or triggers an explosion, maybe? I don't know. Something destroys the dam. And water is returned to the earth. Apparently, all of the water, too. It was just stored up into one big dam. It filled up the Mediterranean real quick. The only issue is that the water will be exposed to nuclear fallout and become undrinkable, and the last remnants of mankind will die out. Damn. Anyways, the children celebrate. The Protectorate is presumably done. Roll credits. The most common criticism of Solar Babies is that it is derivative, that it borrows too heavily from Mad Max, E.T., Blade Runner, and Star Wars without understanding what made any of those films work, which is a coherent story. The movie never decides what it actually is. Is it a story about eco-warriors fighting tyranny? Is it about magical gifted people who can speak to animals? Or is it about a skateball tournament? Well, all 3 of those are a no, but they're all introduced. The beginning of the movie tells us the dangers of nuclear war, how the E-Protectorate and the eco-warriors fought for who controls the water, how long it's been since the deadly war that destroyed the world. But that was all sugary coating that really didn't play no grand narrative. The concept was introduced, but never fleshed out. Then there's the animal speakers. Darstar's people who can whisper to birds and bend them to their will. The movie introduces them like they're going to matter, so you kind of go like, oh, are they like the original eco-warriors? Were they enslaved because the government feared their ability? Does Darstar even understand his own heritage, or is he just romanticizing something that no longer exists? Some really great questions that the movie has absolutely no interest in answering. And then we come over to skateball. We're introduced to it at the beginning of the movie. Kids playing against the rough bullies. Obviously, they're the jocks who are the best team in the area. We're shown how it's played. We're shown that Bohai can be used to give the Solar Babies the upper hand. We're shown this in a very important sport that is played inside and outside the orphanage. Obviously, this will be reused after one of the children or their mentor is killed inside the orphanage, leading the children to challenge the bullies and the authority in a deadly, lawless arena game of skateball. Nope, wrong go. But those aren't even the worst ideas. The movie's actually filled with little stories, little introductions of ideas that are all abandoned. The torture device plays no significant part in the movie, even though it's done very smartly. It should have been the same torture device that they used to destroy Bohai, or, at least the same robot. Bounty hunters. If the bounty hunters don't play a significant part in the movie, like capturing the children and taking them to the bad guy to set up the final act of the movie, remove them. Tire Town, interesting but worthless sideshow. It's in the movie maybe for a grand time of 10 to 15 minutes, and it plays no larger narrative. The orphanage, once they escape the orphanage, it's never brought up. I mean, you could have played with this. You could have had it where people are shocked to see children, especially, escapees of the orphanage, hinting that maybe the protectorate kidnaps kids for indoctrination. Or maybe showing the children and the world trying to survive outside of the orphanage, making the children wish and want to return to the comfort of repression and guaranteed safety. But the orphanage is an idea that's abandoned once they leave it. It's never brought up again, and it's not even shown in a montage of celebrations of the destruction of the Death Star. I mean, Aqua Bunker. Or how about the tattoo? Why? Does every eco warrior have it? Or did he actually hold his child down and give her a tattoo? Also, wouldn't you make her the main character? Why isn't the story following the little girl that was kidnapped by the authorities, finding her way back home only to inadvertently lead the bad guys to the last refuge against the authority? Just a missed story. But you know what the worst thing about the movie is? How much I like it. It's nonsensical, it's confusing, but it's also whimsical, charming. And if you tell yourself that this is a movie for children, then it's emotionally in line with children below the age of 15, or at least before the age of cell phones. The movie plays a lot like another Brooks movie that he was working on at the same time, which makes me wonder if Brooks infected this movie with the same ideas while rewriting Matrov's work. But that's Spaceballs, which came out the same year. Both movies are weird, absurd, and incoherent, and box office bombs. The only big difference between them is that the love for Spaceballs is deeper than even the remotest interest for Solarbabies. The name alone probably drives people away. But if I was 8 years old looking for a movie to watch that pairs well with Saturday morning cartoons and a bowl of cereal, with the same similar spirit and vigor as Power Rangers, then this is it. We already have our wide assortment of cast members, the writing is in the same tune, and it's scary at moments, which makes it more memorable for children, but it doesn't fall into demoralizing manner that certain children movie attempts do at times. But outside of that, there's not much more to say. So you guys have a good one. Bye.